Yep, live now. You see it?
I do.
All right. We are back again with the Pragmatism of War, part 2. I am here with Bobert McMobert, McBobert. And yeah, we're gonna do another Patriotarchy podcast. So let's strap in. Let's have some fun, guys. Anyway, we were gonna do a Friday the 13th episode, but in the spirit of that, knowing that obviously this is a Christian podcast, but we're gonna obviously break the mold a bit here. We're gonna start off with a spooky story or a spooky legend, whichever you want to do first, Robert. You're more than welcome to just share and have some fun with it.
Okay, so this is a story that happened to me, actually, on a January morning. Not long ago, not this year, but previously. Maybe it was a Friday the 13th. I don't know. One morning, I was in the bathroom early in the morning doing my morning libations. And my wife was in the kitchen. She was getting breakfast for the children. And suddenly I hear a shout from the kitchen. And she says, Robert, there's a wolf. There's a wolf in our yard. What are you talking about, woman? This is Florida. There are no wolves in Florida. I get up, I hike up my pants, and I come running out of the bathroom. What are you talking about? And I look out the window where she's pointing, frozen in surprise or horror. And all of our ducks have fled to the porch where they're all screaming and quacking as if their lives depended on it, which as it turned out they did, because there in the middle of our yard stood, I swear, a 40+ pounder coyote.
Dang.
Big boy. A big boy right there. And boy, was he eyeing up those ducks. Looked like a delicious treat for him and the coyote pack, I'm sure. At that time, I had not staged a rifle where I could actually get to it quickly. I was worried that by the time I would retrieve something to run out in the backyard with, we'd have some nommed-on ducks. So I rush onto the porch, and I look around, and I just grab a shovel, closest thing at hand, and I run out there into the yard, and I stare down that coyote with a shovel in my hand. And the coyote's just standing there, and he looks at me, and then he looks behind him, and I look behind him, and there on the other side of our fence, which had clearly done nothing to impede him, stood another coyote. Great. So he turns around again, and he's looking straight at me. And then he just turns around, pop, boop, hops over the fence like it wasn't even there. And him and I presume the missus just decide to take off and head back into the brush. And the ducks were saved. But yeah, ever since that time, been a little more prepared for handling intrusions of those who would like to make a quick snack of our little friends.
Yeah, coyotes are seem to be a bit of a problem almost everywhere in the United States. I mean, I really haven't heard of a place in the United States where coyotes aren't.
Yeah,
around.
They've bred everywhere now. They used to just be like a Southwest thing. They were called their original name. It was very cool, actually. They used to be called the American jackal.
Okay.
Which is appropriate given their ecological niche. But they were also called prairie wolves, brush wolves. That's kind of where they lived. They tend to live places where wolves didn't live.
Mm-hmm. Because wolves are bigger and stronger.
Exactly. Wolves would kind of take out the coyotes there because they were just puny. But then we kind of blacked the wolves. We kind of really cut down the wolf population, and so coyotes just kind of spread in the absence of wolves.
Hmm.
They're also just more adaptable than wolves. You hear a lot of they live in like urban environments. Like
Hmm.
they'll go in like the middle of Tampa and stuff.
Oh wow. Okay.
Um, just through dumpsters, eating rats, all that kind of stuff. They're very adaptable. They'll also sometimes crossbreed with dogs, and then you end up with like really big coyotes. The coyote feral dog hybrids are quite gnarly actually.
This
And then oh yeah, what were you gonna say?
no, you go. I was
I
clearing
was,
my throat.
I was gonna say there's also the red wolf. I don't know if you've heard of the red wolf.
I've not.
It's kind of a North Carolina thing. They're almost extinct. They're very endangered. But there's this whole debate on if the red wolf is a separate species of wolf, a subspecies of the gray wolf, or just a coyote gray wolf hybrid. Um, so you've kind of got gray wolves, red wolves, and coyotes. And here's something interesting. I just learned this a few months ago, believe it or not. I or maybe I'd learned it at some point earlier, but I totally forgot. But Florida actually used to have a species of black wolf that was endemic to Florida, and it lived in the Everglades. But it was eradicated by around the 1930s is when it went extinct.
Okay.
But yeah, there used to be a species of black wolf here as well. Interesting.
Was it the kind with the wolf with like those piercing like green or blue eyes? Just then the wolf was like completely black, just dark jet pitch.
I think it was pretty much pitch black. I don't know about eye color.
Okay.
You can look it up, and I don't think there's really any photos of them. There's just some like 19th century drawings and stuff. Because again, they were kind of like an Everglades thing. And if what's really interesting is like in 1890, when the Western frontier was closed, they kind of declared like the end of the Western frontier.
Mm-hmm.
That the that was kind of the official end of the West. But at that time, or at least of the frontier, but at that time, the Western frontier was more explored than the interior of Florida. Like the interior of Florida was more of a
Huh.
unexplored frontier. I mean, it really wasn't until the 60s when they went in there and they did an enormous geoengineering project to drain the Everglades that any of that became like remotely as accessible as we think of it today.
Huh. I had no idea. Is that how they came up with NASA?
I think it was kind of in conjunction with that. I mean, NASA
Or well,
started.
how they headquartered. That's what I meant.
Yeah, so I think NASA was recorded there kind of. It was kind of contemporaneous, I guess,
Okay.
because you had
Interesting.
NACA. It was NACA until I think like the early 50s. Then it became NASA.
Huh. Yeah,
It
I've
might
always
have been until Sputnik,
well,
but it
and then
wasn't really until Sputnik that things really took off.
didn't they have to clear out basically somewhere in the United States that would be some kind meet some kind of like ecological requirements for them to blast off as
Yeah,
con.
so the reason why they picked Florida is, well, for one thing, you want to be on the East Coast because
Mm-hmm.
you want your rocket to go east because the Earth turns to the east, spins to the east. So you always want to launch east so that you can get that velocity boost from spinning in the same direction as the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you were to be like driving a car and you threw a ball out, like a baseball out of your car, you'd want to, if you wanted it to go really fast, you would throw it in the same direction you're driving,
Yeah.
not the opposite direction. So
Yeah.
they wanted to go east. So you need to be on the East Coast. And
Okay.
then you also want to be as far south as possible because, this is just a product of a sphere, spinning. The closer you are to the equator, the faster you're spinning because a location far to the north and a location on the equator, their position doesn't change relative to one another as they spin, right? But
Mm-hmm.
they're traveling different distances, even though they're taking the same amount of time. So you're actually traveling faster at the equator. So the farther south you go, the more of a velocity boost you get from the Earth's spin. So that's kind of how Florida ended up being the place picked. And then on top of that, you had stuff like, it's just cheap land. There wasn't a lot of stuff there at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was also easily accessible. So they were like building stuff in like Alabama that they would like Huntington in northern Alabama, like on the Tennessee River. You could then put stuff on barges in the Tennessee River and then put it down the Mississippi and send it down the Gulf of Mexico around Florida to Cape Canaveral, and just doing it by barges, even though it's kind of a roundabout route, putting stuff on barges is super cheap and easy when you've got like these giant Saturn V rocket pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of another advantage.
Wow, it's kind of cool because it's like you get that mythos, which kind of relates. I mean, well, it doesn't relate, but in a lot of ways, like up here in Michigan, you got all the boats in the St. Lawrence Seaway, and them having to find a way to cut out or engineer a way for boats to get in via the, well, basically through Canada all the way to the Great Lakes. And I mean, they have to come in through Erie, and then you have the locks in between Erie and Erie and which lake is Huron? And
Michigan.
then yeah,
I know. I just know Holmes, but I don't know if that's the order that they're in.
Yeah, it's Erie. Yep, it's Erie to Huron. There's the locks in between them. I forgot what those locks are called. But then you have the Sault Ste. Marie locks up by Lake Superior. So you have, yeah. Does the St. Lawrence Seaway go to? No. St. Lawrence Seaway does not go through Lake Erie. It goes through, oh, okay, that's what I was thinking of. It goes through Lake Superior. So we have the Sault Ste. Marie locks. And for a long time they didn't know how to ship parts. They didn't know how to do any of that up there. So for a long time they had to do almost everything by land before the Sault Ste. Marie locks were built. So that's interesting. Huh.
It's crazy. I mean, the Great Lakes are crazy too. It's like these inland seas almost, and they can be as dangerous as the ocean sometimes.
Well, the Mackinac Bridge took so much engineering. I mean, the guy who built it was, I guess he was just this savant. I mean, shocker of an engineer. And it was one of the most brutal architectural projects anybody's ever taken on in the history of anything to be engineered and built, because of how brutal Lake Superior gets. Yeah. Like they said, the Golden Gate Bridge was nothing compared to building the Mackinac Bridge. And they're comparable. Like I think the Mackinac Bridge is I forgot, like 10 miles longer or something like that. I forgot. It's something like that, longer than the Golden Gate Bridge.
Wow. And so that's like in like Minnesota or Wisconsin or something?
No, that's connecting the Lower Peninsula to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yep.
I gotcha. So it's connecting Michigan to its spoils from the Michigan-Ohio War.
Yeah, which we have touched on. I mean, if we're going to talk about war, why not start with the place that I don't want to talk about, right?
One of the greatest wars of human history is the Michigan-Ohio War.
Yeah. Okay. Tell that to
very underrated
down there.
I mean, Ohio, where's that proud victory? But in the long run, Michigan, they got the Upper Peninsula, so
which is basically Wisconsin. But yeah,
it's like how the British won World War II, but then they lost their empire,
which is basically now Wisconsin, but just Michigan.
Yeah, I thought Wisconsin was more like Germany.
You did?
A lot of Germans there.
Lots of cheese.
Lots of cheese. That's true. Cheese is great. I love cheese.
I mean,
You know, it's funny. I thought Tillamook was from Wisconsin, but then I found out it was from Oregon. I was like, what? That's a
oh, really? The brand?
yes. I was like, this is totally Wisconsin, right? And I just assumed because it kind of sounded like something someone from up there would call. Oh, it's Tillamook, eh?
Oh,
And then, don't you know? And
oh
it was
yeah, like
cheese
an engine name. Yeah, I
yeah,
got
yeah, and like cheese and stuff. And then I found out it was Oregon. I was like, what? This is my whole life has been a lie.
it. It's just heresy.
Yeah.
This rapper, I must burn it now.
Well, I mean, it's no skin off my back, but I just thought it
Sacrifice,
was strange.
sacrifice to the god emperor of cheese.
The God Emperor of Cheese, whose headquarters is in Wisconsin, I'm sure. You know, speaking of bridges,
He's
have
a,
you heard the Florida Skyway Bridge?
no, I have not.
That was a big long bridge. It crossed all the way across Tampa Bay from Tampa to like basically like St. Peter, Clearwater. Well, they still have it. But what's really funny, well, not funny. What's crazy is in the 80s, a tanker got lost in a storm and hit one of the piers of the bridge or one of the support pillars and blew out like a huge chunk of the bridge. And a bunch of cars like drove off into the bay.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was a pretty big mess. They had to close the bridge and then they rebuilt it differently.
Dang.
Was quite the disaster. It collapsed like a whole section of the bridge and a bunch of people died.
Oof. Ugh.
Pretty
Damn.
unfortunate.
Yeah.
There's a good
I mean,
documentary about it on YouTube. Just look up like the Florida Skyway Bridge.
I've seen pictures of it. I just didn't know what it was called, but now I know what it's called. Wow.
Yeah. I don't think it's quite that long, like Golden Gate Bridge long, but it's pretty long because it crosses Tampa Bay. So it's probably like, you know, in a similar ballpark.
Now we gotta compare Golden Gate. Let's see. Now I gotta fact check.
Fact check.
This is a real
Hillary
podcast.
Clinton is the debate. Like, can somebody fact check that?
Let's have a debate on how long our bridges are in the United
Oh, there's
States.
a lot of bridges called the Skyway Bridge. Sunshine Skyway. That's the name.
Skyway?
It looks very modern.
What the hell? Meters? This is America. Like, why are we doing meters here?
Ooh, 4.14 miles. That's pretty long. But
the Golden Gate?
No, that's the Skyway Bridge.
Oh, Skyway. Total length of the bridge.
That's comparable. Yeah, so the Mackinac Bridge is 26,000 feet. How much does that come to in miles? That's probably like 5 miles.
Yeah. So it's the longest because the Golden Gate Bridge is 1.7 miles.
Oh, so the Skyway Bridge is a lot longer than the Golden Gate, but it's not as long as the Mackinac.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Mackinac Bridge is like almost exactly 5 miles, and the Sunshine Skyway is 4.14 miles.
Huh. I never knew. Wow, look at that.
Well, let's see. Height, 430 feet. Yeah, the Mackinac Bridge is higher too.
Yeah, because it's higher because I know this for a fact. It's higher because the supports had to go so deep into the earth. Because the wind, I mean, is so obvious. It's just insane. Like it's.
Oh yeah, like off the lakes.
Yeah, it's like Lake Superior doesn't get warm ever. So
it feels so superior because it's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I got one. Speaking of local legends, the Nain Rouge is also called the Demon of the Strait, is a legendary creature of Detroit, Michigan, area whose appearance is said to presage misfortune. Its origins in the early French settlement of Detroit, Detroit for you cultured folk, are proposed as deriving from Norman French tales of the Luton or Uten Iutin, a type of hobgoblin, along with Native American legends of an impish offspring of the stone god.
Hmm. Sounds kind of like Mothman.
Yeah, I could see it. I could see it. Also known as Eminem.
He's the Mothman.
He brings the prophecy because
Oh, okay.
he's the white knight for the rap game.
Okay. I was not aware of that.
Yep. Now you know. I mean, come on. You're behind the times there.
I guess I am. I just kind of know Mothman because he's from West Virginia.
Oh, is he?
So yeah. It's like right by Ohio, like the part
Okay.
of West Virginia that's touching Ohio.
Urban legend.
Make you feel uncomfortable. Yeah, very similar kind of thing.
Okay.
Presages misfortune. I think they saw him like before a bridge collapse or something like that.
Ah, okay. They did make a movie out of it too, called The Mothman
Oh,
Prophecies.
okay.
That I do now.
They'll cash in on anything.
Oh well. Well, if it's walking around and it's a cryptic in America, you damn straight they. I mean, you know how long Ancient Aliens has been going for. I mean, come on, man.
Oh man, that thing has been milked to death.
They are just oof, over and over again. It's pretty much the same thing. I'm like, we covered this with Infowars. Can we move on now? Can somebody please write the staff,
Oh,
please?
apparently there's a lot of historical, like French and Indian War stuff happening around the place where Mothman was.
Huh?
Interesting. Point Pleasant, Virginia. Very lots of history there, I guess.
I did not
And
know that.
Mothman
Well, I mean, is there any pragmatism to taking out indigenous folk?
with Mothman or without, or just like in general.
Just in general.
Well, yeah, gotta get some elbow room.
Is the noble savage thing been overplayed because of that fact?
Uh, I guess that's just kind of the equal and opposite reaction.
Oh,
Do you know that Schoolhouse Rock song? Did you see Schoolhouse Rock when you were a kid?
yes.
Elbow room, elbow room. Gotta,
Oh,
gotta get some elbow room.
oh wow.
I was just surprised, like no one's written a version of that where it's like Lebensraum, Lebensraum. Gotta get some Lebensraum.
Huh?
Yeah.
Huh? Look at that. I can't believe you did it, but you did
I,
it.
I went there.
You
I went there.
acapella. You acapella the
I
Lebensraum.
mean, it just seemed apropos.
So we were talking about, which is probably might be a little bit later, but I mean, we might as well just the pragmatism, obviously, of one upping your enemy and technology. You
That always helps.
you obviously had you mentioned we mentioned you know everybody's favorite topic of the devil in this guy with NASA, because the Earth is flat. But then you have but then you have the obvious you know the arms race, and obviously during any time of war you're gonna kind of want to get a one up on your opponent, right?
Oh yeah, especially in the era of the Industrial Revolution forward.
Yeah, I mean, and there was one certain regime that basically launched it into fruition, and it wasn't the United
British,
States.
the British,
The British.
the British. Yes, the Industrial Revolution. I was reading an interesting book that was talking about that. How we there's a lot of debate on like when the Industrial Revolution started, but it seems like it actually had kind of a late start. Maybe not until like the 1820s before you can really start to see it take root. And it's kind of in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars,
Okay.
and there's a whole debate on it. were the Napoleonic Wars like a catalyst that sped up the Industrial Revolution or caused it to come into being, or did they slow it down and they were holding it back and the end of the wars kind of released it?
Huh.
So it's just a question of, okay, was there like this demand for industrial production for like wartime materiel that drove industrial innovation in Britain during the war, or was it a case of there was so much investment going into the army that there wasn't anything left for economic activity, and so the cutting back of military expenditure after the wars kind of released all this capital for the free market to kind of innovate. You know, you can kind of see this same question when it comes to World War II, right? There's, you know, the typical line about how, you know, World War II drove all this technological advancement and kind of gave us this whole era of technological optimism in the aftermath of the war. But
Okay.
there's a real question, like, was it really the war driving this technology, or, you know, was the technological innovation happening anyways, but the ending of the war and sort of the releasing of all this capital into the free market, did that cause, you know, this technological boom that gave us a lot of stuff we have today? Of course, there's some stuff which was undeniably from the war, like the Manhattan Project. I mean, you wouldn't have had the advances in nuclear technology without the government-run program to create a nuclear bomb, obviously.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, kind of basically remains the craziest, largest, most advanced project that like humans have ever done, the Manhattan Project. That's why they're always talking about, like, we need the Manhattan Project of cancer, we need the Manhattan Project of climate change, or whatever.
Yeah.
Because it was crazy the number of people that were working in that project. They had like every smart person in the country. Basically, they'd roped in to working on this thing. That's why you see all these like great physicists and stuff from like the 50s, 60s, 70s. They all worked on the Manhattan Project during World War II. Richard Feynman and stuff, and Oppenheimer and Fermi and you name it, because they roped everybody into it. And that was a case where just like the United States was just so far ahead of Germany. Like Germany was still like just on rabbit trails of like trying to figure out how controlled fission would even work.
Well, they had hydrogen.
They did.
The heavy water, the hydrogen bombs.
The deuterium from like Norway and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, they were trying to get those to work.
Yeah, but they didn't even have centrifuges to like enrich uranium yet. That's how far behind they were.
Huh. Well, I mean, somebody better call the History Channel and let them know.
Sorry. Yeah, they like to hype it up like, what if the Nazis had gotten the bomb?
I mean, it's basically a WWE introduction whenever you say the N-word.
Whoa. Well, let's not say the N-word. We're going to get taken off of YouTube.
I swear, it's just like you get funny mustache man coming in to just some hardcore, just Norse mythology music.
Oh, okay. Is that why his mustache was shaped like that? It's like Thor's hammer.
Yep.
It's just got the handle is shoved up one of his nostrils, and he could just grab it. Like,
yep. Yavel.
Kind of small, but hey.
It's there. It's a I mean, that's just it though. They drop, you know, it's always it's like a History Channel bingo.
Maybe it's like a gnome. His mustache could be the size of like a gnome hammer. Maybe that's the thing. Like Thor was a gnome.
What a cool gnome.
You've heard the whole like gnomes are real thing, right?
They are real.
Gnomes are real, and then you've got like Okay, so Thor and Odin are real. Well, maybe they were gnomes. Put two and two together. Boom.
So what you're saying is like you're literally calling them little gods. Like the little G stands for something, obviously.
Right. Obviously,
Huh.
they've got to be little.
I mean, there's no other way. There is no other way to this.
I think it only makes sense. So basically, the Nazis were on these occult expeditions to like find artifacts, and they
Yeah.
discovered Thor's hammer, which is very small because Thor was a gnome. And so to hide it, they put it on Hitler's mustache. Hitler's mustache was basically he actually, you know, he'd shaved the mustache off, but they kind of put Thor's hammer on there instead, and then like the handle was kind of up his nose.
Yeah.
And that's why he would, give those speeches and be so agitated because he's got the handle of this hammer jammed up in his nose.
Dang.
Very uncomfortable. And that's when his doctor, started prescribing him with all these drugs because he had to keep this hammer hidden. And, just sleeping at night with like a hammer handle shoved up your nose, it's going to be a hard time, but you can get some drugs in you and it's doable. So,
Yep.
Yeah, that's also why they had to burn his body.
Because of drugs?
No, the hammer.
Oh,
They didn't want the Soviets to recover it. But the Americans did get a hold of it, through Werner von Braun, Operation Paperclip. That's also why they called it Operation Paperclip, because Thor's hammer was roughly the size of a paperclip at the time. Because they had rather large paper clips back then. Paper clips have shrunk over time, just like microprocessors. Transistors have gotten smaller. So the paper clips were larger. So they were about the size of Thor's gnome hammer. So Werner von Braun brought it over to the United States. And that's what enabled the U.S. to win the space race and get to the moon first. And actually, they left Thor's hammer on the moon. As part of their project, and that's why they're trying to get back there and retrieve it, because they're worried that Elon Musk might get there first, or the Chinese.
Dang.
And get Thor's hammer back, because they always plan to go back and build a moon base, But Henry Kissinger, didn't want them to get Thor's hammer back, so he ruined the space program.
But the moon base is already there because it was built by the lizard people.
Well, no, that was the thing. They started to build the moon base, but they never finished.
Oh.
Because the lizard people didn't build it. The lizard people were the ones that stopped it from being built.
Because that was like an intergalactic space war?
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, that's one way to view it.
All right. Well, we just got esoteric.
It's kind of gnomes versus lizard people.
Oh. I mean,
and humans are kind of like the proxies, and they're like in the proxy war.
Okay.
So what you had going on in World War II, it was a gnome lizard war, but the humans were fighting, just kind of like Vietnam. It was kind of a U.S. Soviet proxy war, but the Vietnamese were the proxies doing most of the fighting.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah,
makes so much more sense now.
I know there was a lot going on there.
There's a lot.
Kind of that deep history that people really overlook.
They obviously ignore it because they don't want to face the fact that it could be possible.
Yeah, it's very inconvenient. The truth is very inconvenient in this case, and you just don't see people talking about this with World War II. This kind of reality. The whole situation with gnomes, and the whole genocide that was perpetrated against the gnome people. War.
Yes.
I mean, that's why you don't see gnomes as much anymore.
Well, and that's why you had the Smurfs, who were clearly also trying to enact the Smurfensraum, right?
Well, the Smurfs were kind of a radical break-off group from the gnome population.
Oh.
Papa Smurf. Yeah, and you can tell this, like they were they're kind of like like Pictish warriors.
Mm-hmm.
They're not blue naturally. What it is Papa Smurf was kind of a radical gnome who had these crazy ideas about gnome supremacy, but he was also heavily into psychedelic drugs, and that is what ended up causing his skin to turn blue. Because most gnomes do not have blue skin. It's his use of mushrooms and ayahuasca and other potent psychedelic drugs. And so he kind of got this cult following around him, and they became the Smurfs. And they were kind of like, they were like the Weather Underground, or
Okay.
something like that of the gnomes, or
Okay.
the like Red Faction or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh.
Yeah, so that was like a whole sort of, it was a lot like the Spanish Civil War, where you just had all these like factions and sub factions going on, and the Smurfs were like that for the gnome population.
I mean, this is what I've always thought, though, because it's like there obviously has to be a tie-in to this.
Oh yeah, and that's like the same thing with the lizard people, because you had Bowser and the Koopa Troopas as a break-off population there, and they had conflicts with the Italians. Mario and Luigi were agents sent by Mussolini's government to try to keep tabs on the lizard people.
Well, I mean, who doesn't have conflicts with the Italians? I mean, let's be realistic.
Oh yeah, they get in trouble with everybody. So
they're very problematic. I mean, they're always cussing at somebody.
Well, yeah, you just insult their spaghetti and their mama's spaghetti, and there's a war over that. I mean, it was just the two Italian city-states that fought the war over a bucket.
See. I mean, it doesn't. See, I mean, it's not surprising to me that they fought over a bucket. They had to.
What was it? It was Guatemala and Honduras or something, I think, that fought a war over a soccer game.
Well, let's not bring up a non-American sport, sir.
Well, I did say soccer.
I know you did, but it's still not allowed. It's not American.
Well, they fought a war over it, and funnily enough, they had like P-51s and F-4U Corsairs fighting each other.
Wow.
Yeah, because it was like a war they fought in like the 60s, and they had all these like World War II surplus fighter planes.
They so they were who lost the soccer game.
Yeah, one of them lost. One of the countries lost a soccer game, and so they fought a war over it.
That's kind of like Ohio State versus Michigan, I guess.
Well, but then there was a real war before that, which started before the whole sports rivalry.
Yes, I mean it usually all turns. If
okay, it was Honduras and El Salvador. Excuse me. It was called the 100-Hour War.
They just
1969.
Huh. So they just decided just to go at it.
Yep, it was brought on by the 1970 FIFA World Cup qualifier.
So it was a qualifier. It wasn't even.
Yeah, it was a qualifier, and it began in 14th of July 1969 when the Salvadoran military launched an attack against Honduras.
So we're not even talking about like a championship game. We're talking about like a freaking semifinal.
It was a qualifier, yeah.
Oh my God, that's all right. Like I can understand being passionate over a championship game, but a qualifier. I guess the derivative Hispanics and or the Spanish people that are now occupy the Americas from the Italians aren't as pragmatic as their long lost cousin Super Mario.
No, afraid not, I guess.
Huh. Sad to not see that carry down, because where's Bowser to take care of the situation? I mean, he should have just paramilitaried him out and just smashed.
It was one of those Italian commando operations.
Oh, Yeah,
Yep.
I've definitely heard about those because obviously you can't contain. I mean, you got to see. They've been really hush hush about that. Everybody wants to talk about, like on how the CIA and KGB like subvert and want to, and they do all that secret police stuff. But
Hmm.
the Italians just come out and just squash it. Like they don't care. Like they'll just be like, hey, it's let's a go, and then it's over.
Wow.
Yep,
I
it's done.
mean, it's unfortunate, but that's the reality.
They nip it in the bud, and you know what? I respect that. Can't say it's anything that's too controversial because controversy's over.
Yeah.
Like they're like it's done. It's a done. Like a pizza pie.
Yeah. It's over.
So it's over.
But we're back.
But okay, all right. We definitely got tangential, but very good analogies
Thank you.
as to the real pragmatism there are. Yeah, I don't know. Forget it.
Um,
So, one of the crazier things. Have you ever played Medal of Honor for PlayStation and or any other gaming system?
oh man, long time ago. Long time
So,
ago.
so I learned a lot of like on how the uh the CIA got its start via the OSS,
Yes. The uh
Office of Strategic Services.
that's it. I was gonna say the occupational something, but that's OSHA.
Um and it's kind of neat because it's like on how obviously warfare has always, I mean, there's always been espionage activity. And
Yeah.
obviously back in the day, it wasn't as nuanced as it is now because, well, you have technology. So, regardless of people, want to think about on how they're still thinking there's the first industrial revolution that has yet to happen. We're pretty much like in the fourth one, which is strange enough to say, but it's obviously evolved over time.
Fourth industrial revolution.
Revolution. It's a revolution. Are you now here's the thing though. Are you like do you think the pragmatism and as you said before kind of came way due to human survival um because of war? Do you think like that was one of the main factors?
I think well, war is kind of just the ultimate expression of natural selection when it comes to civilization,
Hmm.
right? Because civilization is all about kind of insulating ourselves from natural selection.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I mean, it's good, it's insulating ourselves from nature, red in tooth and claw. But war is the thing which forces pragmatism.
Okay.
It forces. It's the only thing that forces states to be rational. And this is kind of the thing. It's like this. I mean, this is how states developed, right? We didn't really have states in the modern sense,
Mm-hmm.
in the Middle Ages, or even well after. They sort of develop in the early modern period, as it's typically called, kind of the post-Columbus era, you might say. And they develop largely, and they dominate. So before that point, you kind of had two systems of governance, right? You had like city states and leagues that people lived in, and then you had like decentralized states or like feudal states, which we call states, but they're like in city states we also call states, but they're like as different from modern states as a city is from a primitive tribe, right? That's how different they are. Like if you went to one, it'd be like, well, this is not recognizable as a state. No, because the modern state is like this very different thing, the administrative state. And it's an innovation of the early modern period. And basically, they totally dominated to the point where city states and decentralized states don't exist anymore. Like there are literally no like decentralized states of the Middle Ages. There's no feudal states. Maybe like some like primitive warlords or something operate in a system you could call like that in like ungoverned areas of Libya or Yemen or something, but we wouldn't really call it that even still it wouldn't really count. And city states like maybe you can call like San Marino or Liechtenstein or something, but these are very marginal places. Everywhere else is governed by a modern centralized state. And there's this whole question of like, well, how did that happen, right? Because I mean, there's a lot of issues with modern states, right? The modern centralized state is the administrative state is the cause of so much of our problems nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, well, how did they come to dominate like 99.9% of the territory of the planet then? If they have all these issues nowadays of parasitism, of like constraining innovation, constraining economic growth, crushing fertility, from all appearances. Well, how did they come to so predominate? Well, it's basically war. That's how. Because they were way better than the decentralized states or the city states at waging war. That's how they came to dominate. And a lot of people, there's a lot of debate over like, well, what was the first modern administrative state? Probably a good answer that I've heard argued for is quite possibly Sweden, 16th century, 17th century Sweden. Because you look at Sweden during that time, it's really a tiny, marginal, like almost, kind of like subarctic country of just a few million people at the time. But they managed to carve out this massive empire by punching way above their weight on military matters because they introduced like a modern taxation system, a modern conscription system, all this other stuff like before other countries did. They introduced this modern administrative state. I mean, that's probably why, to a large part, why Swedes are such, insufferable like commies nowadays, right? They were the first to have this administrative state, and but because they did, they punched way above their weight at warfare, and they conquered like half of Germany at one point. They dominated Poland. Russia had to literally, Peter the Great had to revolutionize the entire country of Russia, which was many times larger than Sweden in population and obviously in size. But he had to revolutionize the state to defeat them. So it kind of led this chain reaction of other states being forced to adopt a advanced administrative state model. That's where Prussia gets the idea, because the Swedes basically made Prussia into a puppet state during the 30 Years of War because they walked all over northern Germany. So the king of Prussia looks at what Sweden does and he goes, okay, I need to do this. And so we get Prussia and Russia out of this encounter with Sweden. Peter the Great revolutionizes Russia and starts to put it on its meteoric rise to power after encountering Sweden, punching way above its weight. And then Prussia ends up on this same trajectory of sort of centralized power, because the Prussian state was very centralized. They had the joke was that Prussia was an army with a state. And they really adopt that from Sweden, and it puts them on their trajectory of ultimately dominating all of Germany, and then as Germany dominating Europe, because the states that are crushed by Sweden have to adopt the Swedish model or die, is basically what happens. And that's what happened to Poland. Poland was a decentralized state. It was a feudal state. The nobles would elect the king, the Sejm, which was the Polish parliament. When they met to pass laws, any one noble could veto any law. So if there wasn't unanimous consent in the parliament, then a law would be vetoed. So there were several attempts by different Polish kings to reform and centralize the Polish state, and they failed. And ultimately, Poland was carved up and divided between Russia, Prussia, and Austria, which did centralize. And so it was destroyed. So these states either adopted the model or they were destroyed. And you see that like accelerate with the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, because really the French revolutionaries and Napoleon take that centralization up to the next level. And Napoleon has this sort of, this country on meth, basically, in the form of revolutionary France. The whole state is a people at war, and it just walks all over all of Europe with massive conscripted armies. And again, it's the case of all the other countries of Europe have to adopt that model or get crushed. And so you kind of see the
forces the hand.
Oh yeah,
yeah, because it goes away from obviously the Roman and Hellenic idea of the city states. Well, I mean, Rome is obviously more empire driven than the city states of the Greeks, but same conceptually. I mean, if you want to boil it down, like you had Rome, which was the main central city state, and then it built out from there.
Yeah. And it was like a lot of historians describe it as kind of a confederation of cities in many ways, because the cities were the empire, right? The hinterland, it was a just collection of cities. That's how they governed. They collected taxes. They didn't really care like what was happening between the cities, as long as they could travel between them. It got a little more centralized, and I mean, this is debatable, right? Like, what does it mean to be modern? But like more recognizably a centralized bureaucratic state after the crisis of the 3rd century and the Diocletian reforms, which introduced a lot of features to kind of strengthen the central Roman state to prevent some of the issues of the crisis of the 3rd century. But yeah, previous to that, for sure, it was very much kind of like you had the great city of Rome, and then you had all these sort of other cities that were its subsidiary cities. And like this is how empires worked, like in the pre-modern era. By and large, they were much less like, oh, these are our borders, our lines, our territory is like this. They wouldn't describe their territory of like, oh, our border goes from here to here. It was more about our territory is this collection of cities and everything in between. Like Suleiman the Magnificent or the Ottoman sultans would like describe themselves in terms of like what cities they ruled over, ruler of Istanbul and Aleppo and Edirne and whatever, Belgrade, whatever, stuff like that. So yeah, it was definitely a different. It wasn't like a unified thing. It was like we have this collection of different territories. But that very much changed, like in the period of centralization.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, though, too, obviously there was that heavy Mediterranean influence of the city-states because of the trade routes. I mean, you had desert, you had barren land in the Mediterranean, so you So you had to set up those cities to get those trade routes going, where having a full state was obviously a little bit harder to accomplish, and especially back when, they didn't have tanks, trains, automobiles,
Oh,
and moving pieces, moving, I mean, it's moving behemoths of steel. You had to have centralized locations. Otherwise, I mean, on those treks, people would die. Like, you'd get marauded, or they would die of starvation, or thirst. So it would just be death. Death was just a constant back in those times. And I mean, even even when you heap warlike or religious persecution on top of it, like, that amps it up even more. And with the fanaticism, it was just so prominent amongst, I mean, I hate to say this, but it was just so prominent amongst all, pretty much every region of the world goes through that kind of thing. It seems like you have the fanaticism, and then you have the reformation of it, and that's, I mean, the fanaticism always leads to war. Like, not just some of the time. Like, it is a human pattern. And as you said, it kind of does dwindle down to, well, as much as I don't believe in evolution, there is a weeding out, and or, well, natural selection, or strong, the strong will survive kind of mentality. I mean, is that a primitive and or very, very pragmatic way of survival for human beings? I-
I think it's almost the opposite. Where you said that the fanaticism leads to war. I think it's almost the other way around. The war is what leads to fanaticism. And
Oh,
you can
okay.
especially see that in the case of, I mean, World War One to me is the prime example. Um, one historian who looks at the origins of World War One kind of talks about how, like, prior to World War One, there just wasn't the sort of like enmity among Europeans that we think of in like the aftermath of it, of people being like, "Oh, I'm French and I really hate Germans,"
Hmm.
or "I'm German and I really hate Russians," or something like that. Like that, that was a product of the war, not a cause of the war. The war and the suffering that the war generated caused that hate. It's like Yoda says, right? Like, suffering leads to anger, and anger leads to hate, and hate leads to the dark side.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, it does.
but but I mean, I think there's almost a little bit of truth of that at a societal level. Like, the
Okay.
suffering of the war is what generated the fanaticism. This is what kind of prevented, like, the leaders of either side from like bringing it into the war, was the fact that it just the cost had become so great that their
Hmm.
people demanded nothing but like an absolute victory. There couldn't
Well,
be
I
like this
mean,
sort of reconciliation.
right. And I mean, there also is that, okay, because I can obviously, there's a reluctancy. I mean, nowadays, people are like, oh, we need to nuke Russia, and it's like, well, you guys are afraid of a freaking of a freaking Chinese of a virus of unspecified origin, of an unspecified type, and you guys want to nuke an entire country off of, one of the largest country in the world, off the planet. um so it's like, where is the reasoning, where is the pragmatism of any of this? And it's like, well, it's easier to start a war, to press a button, than it is to actually send physical assets over there and see people get, you know slaughtered. um and it's like that. I feel like, I mean, fanaticism, I mean, it's weird because of Christianity. You see it on the other side. You see the religious fanaticism of mo- more most of the time Muslims that leads to their war. You know, and they've been warring for thousands of years. They're just pissed off at everybody. But but I mean, you see that you see that come out in something like Dune, something like 40K. So you see syntheses of it everywhere. Like you see that on how that religious fanaticism can carry over into a very warlike or warrior like culture. And you're right. Like even with well, what started World War I was really the murder of the Archduke, but there was deeper ethnic roots to it. It was Serbians versus who am I thinking of? What do they call them? Serbs versus
Everybody.
yeah,
I mean, well, I mean, but that's true, right? So that's kind of what that sort of like mutual hatred. That was a feature of the Balkans, right? It wasn't
yeah,
of the
right.
wider Europe. There was that sort of like internecine hatred, like Greeks and Serbs and Bulgarians and Turks,
Hmm.
all mutually killing and hating each other.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was very much a Balkan thing, but that wasn't a European
yeah,
thing
yeah.
until the war made it a European thing. Like prior to, I mean, because the Balkans had that sort of turmoil and war for a long time, which is why you could kind of have that tension and that like mutual hatred. Like, but the war is what generated that in Europe more broadly, where you had this kind of feeling of like, oh, I'm gonna go kill a Hun or
Hmm.
whatever sort of thing.
Yeah,
That was not something that people would have thought before World War One started. It was just barbaric. Like before that, people really got along
yeah.
fairly well. It was really, yeah. So kind of a combination of this sort of ethnic cauldron from the Balkans boiling up into the rest of Europe, and then just like a series of like terrible miscalculations and blunders leading up to the war with like how um, the Austrians and Russians and such sort of handled the lead up to the conflict.
Well, I know what I'm about to say might be a bit controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway because Eastern Europeans tend to be more staunch and in their ethnic 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 makeup and in their traditions, obviously. Then it seems like the more west you go in Europe, the more sort of blended and dare I say, damn, you know, damn near close to cosmopolitanism as it gets to the more western you get. But with due respect, that each country and its own has obviously a very deep and rich history. Um, but it doesn't seem as ethnically tied to what the Balkans and the Eastern Europeans see as their way
Yeah,
of
that's just a product of the Balkans and Eastern Europe, like being on a war zone, basically, right? So
yeah.
you have they're in a borderland. You have to have those like sort of close. You develop those blood ties. It's like, oh, I can trust my blood,
Hmm.
you know, because you live in such great uncertainty. But
Yeah.
because Western Europe was by and large so much more peaceful, um, and like not in that sort of turmoil, they could develop these sort of like broader relationships where you didn't have to just save trust for those you were related to. Um, you even see a similar thing with like this sort of clannishness is a typical term for it. This sort of loyalty to blood. You see it with the Scots Irish, they're called, or the borderers. So they were a population that lived in the borderland between Scotland and England. And it wasn't quite Balkans level, but you had this period of about 800 years from, or about 600 years, I guess, from the mid 11, early to mid 1100s to the, all the way to the 45, the Jacobite uprising of 1745, where there's this constant back and forth of war between England and Scotland. And
Mm-hmm.
these people were stuck in that border region. And so they had this constant turmoil of being like the border zone of war. They developed that same sort of clannishness, like of only trusting blood and kin, or trusting blood and kin, like to a much greater extent than just like the average Western European. So
Right.
it's like a product of living in a very difficult and uncertain area, a war-torn region over a long period of time.
Didn't the Jacobites, didn't they pull off, speaking of religious fanaticism, didn't they pull off like a mini British Inquisition?
The Jacobites, I mean, they didn't really control Britain.
No.
I mean,
Am I thinking of like the French Catholic
Jacobin,
Jacob?
Jacobin, yeah, Jacobins and Jacobites are very different.
Okay.
They're
Okay.
almost opposites.
Oh
So,
wow. See, so there you go.
because the
That's what.
Jacobites were like the people who wanted this, so the Stuart kings, were kicked out of England, and they wanted the Stuart kings to come back.
What's a Stuart king?
So, well, there was the Stuart dynasty. So
Oh,
you had the War of the Roses, and then you get the Tudor dynasty, Henry VII. He is a cadet branch of the Plantagenets, who had been the previous dynasty. And
okay.
there's this whole dynastic struggle called the War of the Roses after the end of the Hundred Years' War, because there's like a whole succession crisis in England. So Henry VII takes over. His son's Henry VIII. He's Henry VIII. I am. Yeah, the six wives or whatever. Divorce beheaded, died. Divorce beheaded, survived. And he, does the Church of England and all that stuff. And then his daughter is Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, the Spanish Armada, and all that fun stuff.
Mhm.
Shakespeare, and
Yeah.
she never marries or has any children. So her cousin, I believe he's her cousin, is the King of Scotland, James the Sixth of Scotland. He ends up taking the throne of England because Elizabeth dies without children, and he is James the First of England. He's a Stuart because he's from Scotland, and so that's the start of the Stuart dynasty.
Okay.
So he's the one who gives us the King James Bible. Is where that comes from, King James the First of England,
I
and he has.
mean, he's already got a great name, so
Oh yeah,
obviously.
King Jimmy. He talked with a lisp though. That's what he was always saying.
Hey guys,
Giveth,
what's going
giveth
on? You guys podcasting right now?
the
I'm here.
Lord giveth, and He taketh away.
Taketh. Taketh.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Taketh for everybody. It's
But
got
anyhow, King Jimmy, when he kicked the
royalty.
bucket, his son
Yeah.
Charles took over, and he was Charles the First. And he had some issues. He was not. Let's just say he could have really afforded to read the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, because he was not good at that. And he made a lot of enemies, and there ended up being a big civil war called the English Civil War, or sometimes the War of the Three Kingdoms, which is kind of a cool name, even though it's
It's
all
what's
they like to rename it that because they want to decenter England from the war, which was where most of the war happened. But War of the Three Kingdoms is very cool. I'll give them that. So
it's very Asian sounding.
it does. It sounds like the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's got some teriyaki flavor to it instead of the bland beans and rice that are toast or whatever the hell. I don't even know anymore what they eat. I
I
see
mean, they're trying
pictures
to
of
pull
it.
in because they're like, it's about like it's England, Scotland, and Ireland are all kind of in this whole conflict. And I mean, Ireland does lose like 40% of its population or something during this time, so it's more catastrophic in Ireland than anywhere else. That's Cromwell. Cromwell did that. It's like,
Mhm.
it's like there's a British talk show clip that's on YouTube that's so funny. It's like one of these British comedy talk shows. They're like talking about how the British like cabinet or something. This one cabinet minister was like receiving the or the Irish ambassador, and the British cabinet member had a portrait of Cromwell hanging up over his desk, and they were like, it's like if they'd accepted the ambassador from Israel with a portrait of Adolf Eichmann on the back of their wall.
Ooh.
Yeah, Cromwell, he killed a lot of Irishmen.
Ooh.
But anyways, so during the course of the English Civil War, or War of the Three Kingdoms, Charles I gets his head chopped off. And then they don't have any king for a while, and they have a republic for a little while, and then Oliver Cromwell is the Lord Protector, not king. He was the Lord Protector, not at all like a king. And that for a while, and then he dies, and his son rules for like 2 years, and everybody's like, screw this, his son's an idiot. So then they asked for the king's son to come back. So Charles II comes back, and he becomes king. And then, boy, his wife has like 13 miscarriages because she had some sort of problem. So he never had a legitimate child, but he had like 11 illegitimate children or something. But anyways, he doesn't have an heir. So his brother, James II, becomes king. But the English really don't like that because he's a Catholic. And now they have been Protestant for a while, since Henry VIII. And they really don't like the Catholic king, especially because he's also very friendly with Louis XIV, who was kind of like he was almost kind of a Hitlerian figure of his day, especially to the English, and the Protestant world. The stuff he did, like the revocation of the Edict of Nantes, which is the Edict of Toleration of the Protestants, and how the Huguenots were very horribly mistreated, and a lot of them fled to England in the aftermath, and kind of brought over the horror stories. And he was doing all this stuff trying to like conquer a bunch of Europe. So he's like marching to war basically, in the Rhineland, and so the English are like, we're ditching this James II guy. He's a Catholic. We can't trust him. He's in the league with this totalitarian Catholic monster, Louis XIV. So they kick out James II. And then you have a lot of people then they invite James's sister, Mary, who is married to the Protestant Dutch King William, to become king. So that's where you get William and Mary College, actually, in Virginia, is named after William and Mary, King William and Queen Mary. So they don't have any kids, and so then Mary's sister Anne becomes queen. She doesn't have any kids, so then they have to just find like the closest heir, who's like a third cousin or something, George I, who's the Elector of Hanover, and he doesn't speak English at all. He only speaks German because he's German. He's from Germany, and he ends up becoming the King of England, and that's really where the current monarchs of England descend from.
Descended from the German. Okay.
Yeah, and so you had a lot of people at that point, especially at that point where you have like a foreign German king. He doesn't even speak English, and this is really where the Parliament starts to get a lot more power, and the power of the monarchs really starts to decline in England, because like George I and George II, neither of them spoke English. So like the prime minister would come in and be like, "Hey, sign this," and you'd be like, "Oh yeah." And stuff, and, like you didn't even know what it said, basically.
It's in English though. I mean, German is English, but it's Germanic.
Yeah,
it's close.
He couldn't read it.
It's close.
Close enough for government work.
It's basically how it goes down in America. So I mean, who's really paying attention?
I mean, that for real, right? I mean, that's better than you could expect of Biden. I mean, I guess
he's got the thing, bro.
Yeah, the thing.
The thing. I say that all the time, and I'm like, all right, that's the thing over there. It works.
So the Jacobites were basically people who wanted King James to come back. the Stuarts to come back. And so, especially once you had these kind of foreign German kings in place, there were some pretty serious attempts by the Jacobites, Bonnie, Charles, and all that stuff to bring the Stuarts back. But that kind of all ended, and it was really a kind of a French proxy effort to, because the British and French fought like a series of wars
Yeah,
over and over again, kind of called the Second 100 Years' War, from when from when James II is kicked out. It's called the Glorious Revolution. So 1688, really through Napoleon. They're just fighting wars constantly on and off. And so, as part of that, the French are like supporting these rebels, trying to bring the Stuart kings back, funding them, funding the moderate rebels. Yeah.
Well, and there's your pragmatism of royalty. I mean, and
Yeah.
and it's kind of cool because like royal lines obviously have to. They don't serve monarchies don't serve as much of an importance as they did in the past to maintain and hold power and keep power. Because obviously, you had to, and and it permeates. It almost permeates more. I feel it permeates more in Asian culture than it does in European culture, to a degree, because those monarchies in Asian culture literally breathed, or civilization literally breathed life into the culture. Like they made it. And in a way, like it Asian culture, it almost didn't evolve like it did in European civilization into an aristocracy, right? You didn't have the bloated oligarchs where it turned it into an aristocracy. It basically stayed in a warlord like state of monarchical, territorial, and I gotta say it. I'm gonna try to say it. Monarchical, monarchical. What
You
am I saying?
did monarchical.
Control, right? So you had even, like, it was almost a constant stalemate, right? With Asian civilizations, where there was such upheaval in European civilization that religious fanaticism of Western Christianity, had a lot of back and forth. You had your dedicated. I mean, I'm almost damn near like, basically that's where a lot of Warhammer gets its influence from, with that, just that hard line of, Protestantism and Catholicism, to where that's what drove, Christendom is what drove a lot of the West. Um, and you see it in, well, like you mentioned earlier, the Jacobins were more so on, they were Catholic. Yes, I got that right. So they were more so on that side. And they were essentially papal fanatics. I mean, they wanted their own papacy in France, right? So they were so driven to the point of pragmatically preserving their own civilization through the faith that they held so deeply to basically, you know, imbue it into entire culture, and to say that each, um and not to compare it to the Eastern European states, because obviously Eastern European states have their own cultures. They do tend to blend together, whereas the more west you get, the more the broader it gets. Like, France has wine. France is more known for wine and champagne. Germany's more known for beer and sausages, right? So you have your cultural distinctions. And I know I've basically trivialized it to food, but what I'm saying is obviously resources have a lot to do with that. But what I'm trying to say is that there's those tie-ins to. I mean, they're culturally significant because they help develop the identity of the certain civilizations and the cultures that they're tied to, or they're recognizable with.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
it's kind of neat on how like that breaks down, but it's like, you know, you see a country like Russia go through what they've been going through, and they still have that extreme hangover from communism. And they've always had it. Like they've never really been had a reprieve from it. But with China, they're more so concerned about the sake of preserving who they are, like a spirit, like they have that spirit of a people mentality, that collective, it's it's collectivization, but at the same time, it's like you can't kill the spirit, that ancient spirit that's just there. Like it's just like, you can feel it. And for a long time, and I'll always remember this in the United States news. They were basically trying to subdue the Hong Kong protesters, and for a long time, I saw a lot of the right-leaning media saying, "Well, we'll just replace the Hong Kong protesters with Antifa. We'll just ask for a trade-off because one side obviously wants freedom, as it's always been the spirit of the people, right? And Antifa is obviously, well, we all know where that goes. Um, so it's really interesting because once you kind of realize that and identify with it, like there is that pragmatic approach to not only that civilizational identity, but that cultural identity that's tied to it. And obviously civilization is a lot more on a broader scale than culture.
yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like a meta culture, or yeah,
Yeah.
part
Yeah.
of several cultures.
Right. Right. Because I mean, there's probably more than several different dialects, I'd imagine, in a place like China. um
Yeah, well, that's a whole, yeah, China's a whole thing for sure.
it is a whole thing. But I mean, like the whole dynasty thing too is interesting because obviously people are going to stay in power, and people are going to hold on to that power. So when you have, like, in the modern day sense, you know people see somebody, not that I'm pro Russia or pro Ukraine, but when people see somebody like Putin, they automatically want to say the H word and then the N word again. They automatically want to
Don't say
go
the
there.
N-word.
It's coming back again. But the G is silent in the gnome, so I don't know if it's truly the N word. Um,
Oh, you're right. I
yeah,
didn't think of that.
yeah, it could. I mean, it's there,
That's
but
pretty good gnarly.
gnarly. Go catch some waves, brah. But it's like, people are it automatically programmed to think the worst when it comes to that, the worst when it comes to, well, and the other part is like people don't treat Russia like an empire, because that's essentially what Russia has always seen itself as, regardless of the ism that's occupying the country or prevailing over the country. They've always kind of been toe to toe, or they've tried to go toe to toe with somebody like England, right? And which is why they don't like Anglos or Germans. Um, in a way, Germany has always kind of had that attitude too, like they're a Germanic empire, but obviously they're a little bit more imbued with that Holy Roman Empire mentality than Russia. Well, I don't, yeah, whatever. Um, I'm not gonna harp too hard on any of that aspect, but the thing is that it's like where am I going? So somebody when they see somebody like Putin, they automatically want to assume the worst. They want to always go back to the worst parts of history as to how to justify that, right? And I mean, I don't know if that's human conditioning, or that's just, being pragmatic about that approach to thinking, you know, that guy's oh. Well, I guess his phone died. I guess we got to do a part 3. Well, he's done. Is he there? Uh-oh. Hmm, Um, is that all, folks? Okay. Bye-bye for now.